So, what if I told you that you're dreaming right now? According to one very unusual text, that's exactly what's happening. We're about to dive into the esoteric treatise of Hermetic astrology, and it's a wild ride. It basically says our normal, everyday waking life is just another kind of sleep, and it claims to offer a real path to finally waking up. Right off the bat, the source material doesn't pull any punches. It just drops this bombshell. And look, this isn't supposed to be some poetic metaphor. This is the core diagnosis of the entire system. The idea that the life you believe you're consciously living is just a dream. This one single radical idea is really the key that unlocks everything else we're about to explore. So let's start there with the diagnosis, because according to this text, before you can even think about finding a cure, you have to fully accept the problem. And the problem isn't that we sometimes fall asleep. No, the problem is that, spiritually speaking, we are never truly awake to begin with. The source has a pretty provocative term for us in our normal state. It doesn't call us human beings, it calls us intellectual animals. Now, the whole point of this is to kind of shock us into realizing something. Yeah, we have intellect, but for the most part, we're just running on instinct and habit, like any other animal. We haven't yet become what the text calls a true human. This slide lays out a fantastic metaphor from the text. Think of reality as a four-story house. We spend our entire lives, it says, completely trapped on the bottom two floors. The first floor? That's literal sleep, where our ego just wanders aimlessly through dreams. The second floor, which we call waking life, is described as just a more organized, more coherent dream. The two upper floors, true self-consciousness and objective consciousness, well, they remain completely locked and unexplored for almost everyone. Okay, so if we're all sleeping, how in the world do we wake up? Well, the text doesn't just diagnose the problem and leave us hanging. It lays out a very specific path, like a ladder out of the dream, and it all starts with some really practical first steps. And this right here is the absolute, non-negotiable first step. It's not about just kind of agreeing with the idea. No, it's about having this profound gut-level realization that your life is basically on autopilot. The source is crystal clear on this. The path to awakening only opens up for the person who truly, deeply understands that they are asleep. So, from that big realization comes this very practical technique called the division of attention. Step 1 is subject. You have to constantly remember yourself, that inner feeling of, I am here. Step 2 is object. You observe the world around you in vivid detail, but, and this is the key, without losing that self-awareness. Then step 3, place. You constantly ask yourself, where am I? Why am I here? And then comes the wild part. The text suggests you should literally jump, with a real intention of floating. Why? Because you might just discover you're actually in the dream world and not the physical one. All right, now we're moving from those first steps into the real core mystery of this whole system. This is what the ancient traditions would call the great work. It's the secret engine that's supposed to transform that intellectual animal into something more. It all really centers on this ancient, famous question. Being born again is presented here not as a nice metaphor, but as a literal alchemical process. So the text poses a very direct challenge. How does a person actually engineer their own second birth to enter this higher state of being? Now, the answer the text gives is, well, it's pretty esoteric. It all comes down to a practice called mythona. And just describing this directly from the source, it's defined as a kind of secret sexual magic. It says that this creative energy, instead of being released, is refined and redirected internally to fuel this whole alchemical transformation. So what's the purpose of all this? It's incredibly ambitious. As the slide shows, the goal is to completely rebuild ourselves from the inside out. The text says we're all born with what it calls lunar bodies. These are our default, animalistic vehicles, subject to all the mechanical laws of nature. The goal of this alchemical work is to use that powerful, transmuted creative energy to forge a brand new, superior set of vehicles, the immortal solar bodies. So basically, this practice is said to awaken the kundalini, which the source describes as a sacred fire coiled at the base of your spine. When this energy is awakened, it rises up and literally crystallizes these solar bodies into existence. According to the text, that process is the second birth. It's a literal physical creation. But here's the twist. Achieving this second birth, it's not the finish line, not even close. In fact, it's described as revealing the final and maybe the most difficult obstacle of all. See, creating the solar bodies gives you the fancy new vehicle, but now you have to deal with the flawed driver, the ego. The text has a really specific view of the ego. It's not one single self. It's a pluralized I. You have to imagine a chaotic committee of thousands of little selves inside you. There's an I that gets angry, an I that feels jealous, an I that is lazy, and each and every one of them is constantly fighting for control. The source uses this incredible metaphor to make the idea really tangible. It says our true essence, our soul, is shattered into thousands of fragments, and each fragment is trapped inside a bottle. And every single one of those little I's, pride, envy, greed, is one of those bottles. The great work, then, is to systematically shatter every last one. And this slide right here brilliantly illustrates why that work is so critical. The text warns of this terrible failure state, a being called the Hanamasujan. This is someone who successfully created the divine solar bodies, but failed to get rid of their plural, messy, lunar ego. And the result is this tragic paradox, a creature that is half angel and half beast, forever at war with itself. This is the ultimate danger that has to be avoided on the path. So, all of this brings us to the final destination. After diagnosing the sleep, prescribing the method to awaken, and confronting that inner legion of its, what does it actually mean to become a true human at the end of the day? The ultimate victory is what the text calls the initiative resurrection. And as this slide shows, it's a total purification. The entire legion of those little I's is completely dissolved, and the old animalistic lunar body just withers away. All that's left is the pure, true being, now clothed in the immortal solar bodies it consciously created for itself. And the state that results from this resurrection is, according to the source, nothing short of supernatural. A resurrected master is described as having powers that just defy our normal reality: command over the elements, mastery over life and death, even the ability to perform physical alchemy. This is the almost unbelievable endpoint of this path, the fully realized true human. So we've just walked through a truly radical map of human consciousness. This text presents one very demanding, very narrow way to escape what it calls the dream of ordinary life. And it leaves us right back where we started, but with a much, much deeper question. What would it actually take to stop dreaming and finally truly awaken?